Welcome to the Texas A&M San Antonio Educator Preparation Program. We want to thank you for agreeing to mentor a clinical teacher this semester. You are an integral part of this capstone experience. This video will provide an overview of the semester, briefly outline the required paperwork, and describe the formal evaluation process. You should have received an electronic version of the Clinical Teaching Handbook and Syllabus from the University Teaching Specialist. It can also be found on the Texas A&M San Antonio webpage, www.tamusa.edu. From the home page, you will click on Academics, then College of Education and Human Development. From here, you will click on Educator Preparation Program found in the blue toolbar on the right side of your screen. Next, click on Forms and Applications. You will see the link for the CT Handbook in the middle of the screen. This link will bring up a PDF of the Clinical Teacher Handbook. You will also see a link for the syllabus. The following information can be found in the handbook. Specific due dates for the semester can be found in the syllabus. The clinical teacher's schedule should mirror the district schedule for full-time teachers. They will spend a total of 16 weeks in clinical teaching and will follow the school district's calendar. There are 3 scheduled professional development seminars throughout the semester. These seminars will be held on one Friday each month. If the clinical teacher must be absent, then he or she must complete an absence sheet and obtain a signature from all required parties. Clinical teachers are allowed to miss 2 days without consequence. We encourage them to use these days for certification testing purposes. If a clinical teacher is absent for 3 days, we ask that the cooperating teacher and clinical teacher notify the teaching specialist, who will then complete an absence monitoring form. Clinical teachers who miss 3 or more days may be required to make up the days at the end of the semester, depending on the reason for the absences. Clinical teachers are expected to abide by the Code of Ethics and Standard Practices for Texas educators. Please take the time to review each principle in the Code of Ethics with your clinical teacher. Clinical teachers have a series of assignments that they are required to complete and turn in on Blackboard throughout the semester. These assignments are listed in the handbook and syllabus. We strongly encourage our students to pass the Texas certification exams prior to the end of clinical teaching. Please encourage your clinical teacher to be studying for the exam and assist him or her in any way possible. You will find the required forms for you, the cooperating teacher, to complete in the handbook. We ask that you conduct 2 formal evaluations of your clinical teacher. You will see that the formal evaluation form that is used by Texas A&M San Antonio is aligned to the Texas Teacher Evaluation Support System, or TTES. The TTES is a coaching model and is intended to support the continued development of educators. You should plan to meet for a pre-observation meeting prior to each formal observation. Clinical teachers are required to submit a formal lesson plan to you prior to the pre-observation conference so that it can be reviewed with the student during the conference. A pre-observation form is available in the handbook. Please discuss all aspects that are listed on the form and offer advice and guidance to your clinical teacher during the pre-observation conference. The formal observation should follow the pre-observation conference within a day or 2. You will use the cooperating teacher, teaching specialist evaluation form during the formal observation. The TTES is comprised of 4 dimensions: planning, instruction, learning environment, and professional practices and responsibilities, and 5 levels of development: distinguished, accomplished, proficient, developing, and improvement needed. During a formal observation, the observer should take notes on what the clinical teacher is doing and saying, and what the students are saying and doing during the lesson. This information should be recorded on the pre-service teacher evidence data collection chart. This information should be used to reinforce and clarify the ratings on the rubric. It is important to note that the rating of proficient is representative of what the TEA calls rock-solid teaching. The goal is for clinical teachers to reach the level of proficient by the end of the semester. Clinical teachers are not expected to receive ratings of accomplished or distinguished on the evaluation rubric, unless truly warranted. As you read through the criteria for each dimension, you will see that there is an additional rating of NA in Dimension 4. Please indicate NA if the criteria is not observed. This will often be the case with Dimension 4.3, Professional Development, and 4.4, School Community Involvement. The formal observation should be followed by a post-observation conference. Please make every effort to have the post-observation conference within 24 hours of the formal observation. During the post-observation conference, the clinical teacher should reflect on what went well during the lesson and what she or he would change. The evaluator should have the reinforcement area and refinement area filled out prior to the post-observation conference. The self-analysis questions, evidence, and recommendations and goals will be completed during the conference through discussion and reflection on the lesson. The university teaching specialist will schedule 3 formal observations that will be conducted in the same manner as the 2 formal observations that you conduct. The clinical teacher must have a total of 5 independent formal observations, 2 by you, the cooperating teacher, and 3 by the university teaching specialist. All formal observations must last a minimum of 45 minutes and be recorded as such on the evaluation form. The evaluator must fill in the start time and the end time for each observation. There must be a minimum of 3 weeks between formal evaluations conducted by the same person. The time frames for these observations are mandated by TEA and identified in the syllabus. In addition, cooperating teachers are required to complete a teacher candidate midterm disposition form and a final attributes form on the clinical teacher. The midterm disposition form is due at the midway point of the clinical teacher's assignment with you. This will be at the 8-week point for students who are completing 16 weeks in your classroom, or at the 4-week point for students who have a split placement. Please review the midterm form with the clinical teacher and scan and email the form to the university teaching specialist by the due date listed in the syllabus. Please note the language at the bottom of the midterm report. It is important that you communicate your feelings about the clinical teacher's progress at the midway point so that any concerns can be addressed. The final attribute form is due during the last week of clinical teaching and should also be reviewed with the clinical teacher and scanned and emailed to the university teaching specialist. It is very important that you complete the bottom of the final attribute form. TEA Rule 228.35 states that clinical teaching is successful when the candidate demonstrates proficiency in each of the educator standards for the assignment, and the field supervisor and cooperating teacher recommend to the EPP that the candidate should be recommended for a standard certificate. If either the field supervisor or cooperating teacher do not recommend that the candidate should be recommended for a standard certificate, the person who does not recommend the candidate must provide documentation supporting the lack of recommendation to the candidate and either the field supervisor or cooperating teacher. Cooperating teachers oftentimes have questions about the pacing of clinical teaching. You will find a recommended pacing guide in the Clinical Teacher Handbook. During the first couple of weeks of clinical teaching, the clinical teacher should become acclimated to the campus culture, familiar with the daily schedule, and become aware of the procedures and rules in the classroom. Please make space for the clinical teacher to have a desk somewhere in the class and take time to walk around the campus introducing him or her to the faculty and staff. It's also important that the clinical teacher be formally introduced to both the students and the parents. We recommend that the clinical teacher compose a letter of introduction to be sent home with the students. A sample letter such as this can be found in the handbook. Clinical teachers will spend a total of at least 3 weeks in full teach mode. They will gradually phase into full teach by taking over the instruction of one subject or class period for a week at a time until they are teaching the full day. The clinical teacher will be responsible for lesson planning, but is expected to follow the normal process of your campus. Therefore, if your campus participates in team planning, the clinical teacher should take part in the team planning. Please support your clinical teacher as needed in the planning process, but allow her or him to exert some independence in this area. Once the clinical teacher has completed at least 3 weeks of full teach, he or she should gradually turn the subjects or periods back over to the cooperating teacher. After full teach, we encourage clinical teachers to visit other classrooms on campus to observe different classroom management techniques and teaching strategies. Clinical teachers who are in a split placement should complete 2 weeks of full teach in each setting, also phasing in and out of the full teach experience. If you have concerns about the progress of your clinical teacher or specific questions, please do not hesitate to contact the university teaching specialist. It is expected that the cooperating teacher and teaching specialist be in regular contact to support the progress of the clinical teacher. If, for some reason, you are unable to reach the university teaching specialist, please feel free to contact the Texas A&M San Antonio EPP at 210-784-2500. Once again, thank you for opening your classroom to a Texas A&M San Antonio clinical teacher. The time and effort that you are putting forth to assist in the growth and development of a pre-service teacher is greatly appreciated.